You're Harold, right? The one who used to run operations training. That's what the new intern asked me as I was crawling under Patricia's desk at 7:42 a.m. on a Tuesday, trying to fix a server connection that had crashed overnight. Not Mr. Foster, not even the VP. Just used to, like I was some piece of old equipment nobody warned him about. I'm Harold Foster, 48 years old, and I've been keeping TechFlow Solutions running for 14 years. Still do, depending on who you ask. The kid chuckled nervous-like, probably thinking I was making a joke. I wasn't. 14 years building this company's backbone, training protocols, operational systems, everything that made this Denver outfit more than just another tech startup burning through investor money. And here I was, flat on my back under a desk at dawn, because our modernized IT structure couldn't handle a basic network failure. Welcome to operations training, also known as the department nobody remembers until everything falls apart or someone needs a scapegoat. Don't get me wrong, I didn't need applause. Never did in the Army, didn't expect it here either. But watching executives I'd trained from day one get corner offices while I got birthday cake in the break room, that's a special kind of reminder about where you stand in the food chain. See, I came to TechFlow straight from 16 years military service. Army logistics, if you want specifics. Started as an 18-year-old kid who thought he knew everything, ended as a master sergeant who actually knew how to make things work. The transition from desert camps to corporate offices wasn't as hard as people think. Same principles apply. Plan ahead, document everything, keep your mouth shut until you're ready to move. When I got here in 2010, TechFlow had maybe 35 employees and our CEO still used AOL email. The place was chaos with good intentions. No training protocols, no operational standards, just smart people running around putting out fires. That's where I came in. Built training programs from scratch, wrote the employee handbook before HR even existed, created systems that actually made sense. The early years were good, real good. Company grew from 35 to 180 people, and every single one of them went through my training. I knew their strengths, their weak spots, who was ready for promotion, who needed more coaching. The founders appreciated that. They offered me equity instead of cash bonuses, back when company shares seemed like monopoly money. Most other VPs laughed and took the cash. I kept those shares. Army taught me to think long-term, and something about owning a piece of what you build just made sense. The joke started around year 8. Harold's a lifer, king of the training kingdom. Don't mess with him, he's probably got dirt on everyone. I smiled through it all. Let them think I was the harmless office veteran who brought donuts and remembered everyone's anniversary dates. Let them forget I had access to every executive's performance reviews and knew exactly who was looking for other jobs. Let them overlook that equity clause I'd negotiated when they were desperate for anyone who could bring order to their chaos. By year 10, they stopped joking and just forgot I existed. Meetings went from let's loop in Harold to who owns training again, like I was office furniture. I watched 6 different managers cycle through above me, all fresh MBA energy, all obsessed with synergy and disruption and digital transformation, all temporary. I outlasted them like rust on a Colorado fence post. Year 12 was when I stopped waiting to be noticed and started preparing for war. Spent weekends learning corporate governance law. Hired a business strategist with my own money. Told my ex-wife it was a fishing retreat to avoid the inevitable questions about my midlife crisis. Took an executive leadership course so intensive I had to use vacation days. The real discovery came when I was reviewing my original contract. There it was, a clause granting me right of first refusal on any major operational changes, signed back when we had fewer than 50 employees. The current board had completely forgotten it existed. I never did. That's when I started building my insurance policy. Every training session I approved, every procedure I documented, every budget line I signed off on, it all became part of a bigger plan. Those vanity courses they like to joke about, corporate governance seminars, legal strategy workshops, leadership succession planning. I wasn't just teaching new hires how to use our software. I was preparing for the day someone would try to push me out. By year 14, I was what you'd call institutional memory. The guy who knew where all the bodies were buried, who remembered why we did things certain ways, who could fix problems that didn't even have names yet. I said nothing when the board brought in their golden boy CEO with his startup attitude and fancy cologne. said even less when they hired his protege, some 26-year-old MBA who thought experience was something you put on LinkedIn. But I documented everything. Every questionable decision, every budget cut, every time they mocked the old guard in meetings they thought I wasn't listening to. Because guys like me, we don't shout when trouble starts brewing. We just pull out the files we've been keeping, check our legal standing, and start planning the counteroffensive. The new CEO, Randall, arrived like a tornado of LinkedIn wisdom and expensive suits. The board practically gave him a parade before he'd even found his office. Disruptive leadership, they called it. Fresh energy for a new era. Translation: younger, louder, completely disconnected from the company he was supposed to understand. Then came Catherine Wells, and that's when my patience really got tested. Catherine Wells strutted into TechFlow on a Wednesday morning like she owned the place. All 26 years of her fresh Wharton MBA still warm in her designer briefcase, wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She had that kind of confidence you only get when daddy's writing the checks and failure isn't really an option. Her title: Chief Innovation Officer. Her mission, according to the company-wide email: strategic optimization of legacy operational structures. Her favorite phrase, which I heard about 6 times in her first week: legacy overhead. I became fluent in Catherine speak pretty quickly after that. See, Catherine wasn't just any MBA hire. She was Randall Wells's daughter. Yeah, Wells. Same last name, same entitled attitude, same complete disconnect from how things actually worked around here. Randall had invested heavily in TechFlow about 18 months earlier, bought himself a board seat, then apparently decided his little princess needed a playground to practice her business school theories. 3 days after she arrived, Catherine called an all-hands culture realignment session. That's corporate speak for I'm about to mess with everything you've spent years building. She stood up there in the main conference room, clicking through slides full of buzzwords and acronyms, explaining how we were going to streamline our human capital development infrastructure. Operations training. My department, the thing I'd built from nothing, was getting rebranded as HPEX. Human Performance Excellence. Or some garbage like that. I watched my team's faces during that presentation. They looked like deer caught in headlights, glancing over at me every few minutes like they were waiting for me to stand up and tell this kid where she could stick her performance excellence. I didn't. Not yet. Army taught me to pick my battles, and this wasn't the hill to die on. Not when I was still gathering intelligence on the enemy, because that's what Catherine was, make no mistake. She wasn't some misguided kid trying to make her mark. She was systematic about dismantling everything I'd built, piece by piece. Started with my team. Within 2 weeks of her realignment, half my people got lateral opportunities in other departments. My senior trainer, guy I'd mentored for 5 years, suddenly found himself exploring cross-functional growth potential in supply chain management. The other half? They got new reporting structures. Instead of coming to me with questions, they were supposed to route everything through Catherine's strategic optimization task force, which was really just her and some consultant named Preston who specialized in ROI accountability, whatever the hell that meant. Let me tell you what ROI accountability meant in practice. It meant every training session had to be justified with metrics and projections and business impact assessments. You couldn't just say, this guy needs to learn how to run the logistics software properly. You had to explain how many efficiency points that training would generate and what the projected revenue impact would be over the next fiscal quarter. It was insane. Like asking a mechanic to prove that changing your oil will increase your car's resale value before he's allowed to touch the engine. But here's the thing about guys like me. We adapt. I'd been through enough corporate reorganizations to know the drill. Smile, nod, document everything, and wait for the new management to hang themselves with their own rope. In my experience, it never took very long. Catherine made it especially easy. Within a month, I started noticing some interesting patterns in the budget reports. Line items that used to say leadership development training or compliance protocol updates were getting relabeled as vague categories like strategic operational support and discretionary human capital investments. My name was still on all the original approvals, mind you. Every expense now getting called legacy overhead had once been signed off on by me, back when the company actually believed that training people was worth more than whatever PowerPoint presentation Catherine was working on that week. The real red flag came when I got a polite email from something called the audit review team asking for clarification on several training expenditures from the past 3 years, as if I'd been secretly hoarding company money in some offshore training account. They wanted detailed justifications for every coaching session, every workshop, every conference attendance, complete with ROI calculations and measurable business impact data. Meanwhile, Catherine was greenlighting consulting fees that would make your head spin. $31,000 to some outfit called Strategic Performance Solutions for a project she called Organizational Acceleration Architecture. When I looked up Strategic Performance Solutions, guess what I found? Company registered 3 days before the first invoice, owned by one Maxwell Anderson, who just happened to be Catherine's roommate from business school. I didn't say anything, not yet. But I started printing receipts, started saving emails, started building the kind of documentation that would make any JAG officer proud, because I could see where this was heading, and I wanted to be ready. The final insult came 6 weeks after Catherine's arrival. I walked into the office one morning and found a facilities guy removing my nameplate, not replacing it, removing it entirely. My corner office, the one with actual walls and a door that closed, was being reassigned for strategic optimization purposes. Where was I going? Cubicle 47, right next to the copy machine. No door, no privacy, just toner fumes and the constant sound of people making copies and complaining about paper jams. The facilities guy looked embarrassed as he handed me a cardboard box for my personal items. "Sorry, Mr. Foster," he said. "Orders from upstairs." I packed my stuff without a word. 14 years of service awards, family photos, the little cactus plant my daughter had given me for my desk. All of it fit in one sad little cardboard box. That's when I knew it was time to stop, gathering intelligence and start planning the offensive. That weekend I drove up to my brother's cabin near Boulder. No cell service, no internet, just me and a cooler full of beer and 14 years worth of righteous anger that needed sorting out. I spread every document I'd been collecting across the kitchen table like I was planning a military operation. Because in a way, I was. First thing I did was map out Catherine's vulnerabilities. The girl was smart, I'll give her that. But she had that kind of book-smart arrogance that makes you sloppy. She assumed everyone around her was either too stupid or too intimidated to challenge her moves. Big mistake. Take that Strategic Performance Solutions payment, for example. $31,000 for Organizational Acceleration Architecture. I'd done some digging, and here's what I found. Maxwell Anderson registered the company on a Tuesday, sent his first invoice on Friday, and got paid the following Monday. No competitive bidding, no vendor verification, no board approval, just Catherine writing checks to her buddy's brand new LLC. But wait, it gets better. That acceleration architecture report Maxwell delivered? I ran it through some plagiarism software a friend of mine uses for his college classes. Turns out about 80% of it was lifted straight from a McKinsey white paper from 2019. Same charts, same terminology, even the same typo, where they wrote organizational instead of organizational. Guy couldn't even be bothered to spell check his theft. So there's fraud and plagiarism right off the bat. But Catherine's real mistake was thinking she could erase my work without consequences. See, every training program I'd ever run, every procedure I'd documented, every system I'd built, it was all connected to actual business results. Real numbers, real outcomes, real value. When she started calling my work legacy overhead, she was basically arguing that training people was worthless. Try explaining that to the 47 employees who'd gotten promotions after completing my leadership development program. Or the 23 managers who'd successfully handled major client crises using protocols I'd taught them. I spent that whole weekend building what I called my evidence package. 3 folders full of documentation that would make any prosecutor weep with joy. Budget approvals with Catherine's signature authorizing questionable expenses. Email chains showing her dismissing safety training requirements. Performance metrics proving that departments I'd trained consistently outperformed those that hadn't. The really beautiful part was folder number 3, bylaws and governance documents. Remember that equity clause I mentioned? Turns out it was even stronger than I'd thought. Not only did I have right of first refusal on operational changes, but any shareholder holding more than 25% could call for emergency board review of executive decisions. And with my 28.7% stake, plus the shares held by 2 former executives I'd mentored who now served as advisors, we had enough votes to make Catherine's life very interesting. Monday morning, I came back to work with a new attitude. Still sitting in that cube next to the copy machine, still getting treated like yesterday's news, But now I had a plan. Started reaching out to my network, casual-like. Coffee meetings with former colleagues, lunch invitations to current board members, friendly check-ins with people I'd trained over the years. What I found was exactly what I expected. Catherine was making enemies faster than she could count them. The sales team was furious about her streamlined client engagement protocols that basically required them to fill out 20 forms before talking to a customer. The engineering department was ready to revolt over her insistence that all technical training be gamified with points and badges like they were kindergartners. Even better, I discovered I wasn't the only one she was targeting. 2 other longtime employees had gotten similar treatment, marginalized, demoted, moved to crappy offices. Catherine was basically conducting a purge of anyone who'd been there longer than she'd been alive. That's when I reached out to Patricia, our general counsel. Patricia and I went way back. I'd helped train her assistant when she first arrived, and we'd worked together on policy updates more times than I could count. Smart woman, sharp as a tack, and absolutely no tolerance for corporate BS. "Harold," she said when I knocked on her door, "I was wondering when you'd come see me." "Things have been interesting lately," I said. "That's one word for it." She gestured to the chair across from her desk. "What can I do for you?" I laid out my evidence package piece by piece. The fraudulent consulting payments, the plagiarized reports, the systematic dismantling of training programs without board approval. Patricia's expression got more serious with each document. "How long have you been documenting this?" she asked. "Since day one. Army habit." She smiled at that. "Harold, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest. Do you have any ownership stake in this company?" 28.7%, I said. "Plus voting proxy agreements with Calvin Rodriguez and Diane Morrison from the advisory board." Patricia leaned back in her chair. "Well, I'll be damned. Harold, do you realize what that means? That I can call for an emergency board review? That you can call for a lot more than that?" She pulled out a thick binder labeled Corporate Governance Procedures. "Have you read Section 12C lately?" I hadn't, but I did that night, and what I found there made me smile for the first time in weeks. 2 days later, Catherine called me into her office. Not the conference room, her actual office, the one that used to be mine with my fake plant still sitting on the windowsill. "Harold," she said, not bothering to look up from her laptop, "we need to discuss your future here." "Do we now?" The board has been reviewing departmental performance metrics, and frankly, the return on investment for your training programs has been disappointing. I just nodded and waited for her to keep digging her own grave. "The board has concluded that your position no longer aligns with our strategic direction," Catherine continued, still typing while she talked to me like I was some kind of interruption. "Effective immediately, your role is being eliminated due to budget optimization requirements." She slid a termination packet across the desk. Standard stuff: severance details, non-disclosure agreement, the usual corporate goodbye kiss. But then she kept talking, and that's where she made her fatal mistake. "There have been concerns about some of your expenditures, Harold. Training sessions that weren't properly authorized, personal development courses billed as team initiatives. The company's being generous here, considering the misuse of funds." Misuse of funds. There it was. She was actually accusing me of the exact thing she'd been doing for months. The audacity was almost impressive. I picked up the packet, flipped through it slowly, then set it back down unsigned. "Catherine," I said, "I appreciate you putting this together, but I think there's been some confusion about my role here." "There's no confusion, Harold. You're terminated. Security will escort you out." "Actually, I'm a shareholder, 28.7% to be exact, which means I can't be terminated without board approval." For the first time since I'd known her, Catherine looked confused. "What are you talking about?" I pulled out my phone and opened my calendar app. "I've called an emergency board meeting for this afternoon. 3 o'clock. I'll be presenting some interesting findings about budget misuse and unauthorized expenditures." I smiled. "Hope you can make it." Catherine's face went through about 6 different expressions in the span of 10 seconds. Confusion, realization, fear, anger, then back to confusion. "You can't just call a board meeting. Section 12C of the Corporate Governance Procedures. Any shareholder holding more than 25% can request emergency review of executive decisions." I've got the votes lined up already. She reached for her phone, probably to call Daddy, but I was already walking out. "See you at 3, Catherine. Don't be late." The next 4 hours were the longest of my career. I spent them in Patricia's office, going over every document one more time, making sure our presentation was bulletproof. We had financial records, email chains, The plagiarized reports, even bank statements showing the payments to Maxwell Anderson's shell company. At 2:45, I walked into the main conference room. The board was already assembled, 5 members total, including Randall Wells looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Catherine sat at the far end of the table, composed but pale. "Good afternoon, everyone," I said, setting my briefcase down. "Thank you for accommodating this emergency session." "Harold," Randall said. Catherine explained the situation. "There seems to be some confusion about your employment status." "No confusion at all, Mr. Wells. I'm here as a shareholder to present evidence of financial mismanagement and fraud." The temperature in the room dropped about 20 degrees. Patricia stood up with her legal pad. "If I may," she said, "we've documented several serious violations of corporate policy and fiduciary responsibility. For the next 30 minutes, we laid it all out. The Maxwell Anderson payments, the plagiarized reports, the systematic dismantling of profitable training programs without board authorization." Catherine's face got paler with each slide. The killer blow came when Patricia displayed the bank records showing Maxwell Anderson's company was registered to his college dormitory address and had never filed any business tax returns. "This isn't possible," Randall said, looking at his daughter. "Catherine, you assured me this consultant was properly vetted." Catherine finally found her voice. "This is clearly a setup. Harold's bitter about being let go, and he's manufacturing evidence to—" "Are you saying these bank records are falsified?" Patricia interrupted. "Because that would be a very serious accusation." No, I'm not saying that. Board member number 3, an older guy named Calvin who'd been with the company since the beginning, cleared his throat. "Catherine, did you personally approve a payment of $31,000 to Strategic Performance Solutions?" "Yes, but without board approval for an expenditure of that size, it fell under my discretionary spending authority." Calvin looked at Patricia. "What's the limit on discretionary spending for department heads?" $15,000 per fiscal year, Patricia said, "and that requires documentation of competitive bidding for any amount over $5,000. The room went quiet except for the sound of Randall Wells' heavy breathing. He looked like a man watching his retirement fund evaporate in real time. "Catherine," he said finally, "please explain how you authorized a $31,000 payment to a company owned by your college friend without proper approval or competitive bidding." "I was trying to move quickly on strategic opportunities. The company needed you to follow established procedures," Calvin interrupted. "Harold, what are you proposing?" I stood up slowly. "I'm proposing we accept Catherine's resignation and conduct a full financial audit of all expenditures since her arrival. I'm also proposing that the board consider interim leadership arrangements while we search for a new chief innovation officer." "And I suppose you think you should be that interim leader?" Randall said, but his heart wasn't in it anymore. "Actually, yes, I do." I opened my briefcase one more time and pulled out the original equity agreement from 14 years ago. "I've been with this company longer than anyone else in this room. I know every system, every process, every employee, and I've never paid my college roommate $31,000 for plagiarized reports." The vote was 4-1. Guess who the one was? By 5 p.m., Catherine Wells was no longer employed by TechFlow Solutions. By 6 p.m., I was sitting in my old office, my office again, with my nameplate back where it belonged. This time it read Interim Chief Executive Officer. The fake plant was still there on the windowsill, still alive, somehow, after all these months of neglect. Turns out some things are harder to kill than they look. Harold Foster, 48 years old, ex-Army logistics specialist, current CEO of TechFlow Solutions. Sometimes the old guard doesn't just survive. Sometimes we win.